So now we are looking into solar diesel applications, and there are ways to optimize diesel battery solar arrays. And what it turns out is these batteries are expensive. The infrastructure required to control generators and batteries itself is expensive. And when it comes down to it, if you ask the facility managers of these diesel powered off grid camps, they'll say the generators themselves are expensive. And so while a PV battery diesel system can be optimal and good and does occur at the residential level, for off-grid homes, when we're looking at the sizes of the controllers for doing something very complex, we're looking at 750 kW on up. Let's see, there we go. And so even the smallest diesel solar controller made by SMA is for systems that are back in the day we would consider a 1 megawatt array to be utility scale, although that's really more of a large commercial facility. Some schools, giant high schools and whatnot, can be over a megawatt in terms of power demand, and then goes up from there. The man camp load that I was looking at was closer to 200 kW, and so the question becomes, well, as a starting point, do we install a lot of expensive infrastructure and batteries up front for someone who doesn't have any energy management on site to begin with? And that comes a matter of well, what's the project budget? Uh, Generators have a spare capacity, that can accommodate surge loads. It's called the spinning reserves. The electric grid has spinning reserves. You don't want to exceed your reserve capacity, because if you draw more power than what you can actually provide, you get into brownout situations. And so to provide reliable electricity, generators are always sized to have some degree of headroom. And that's maybe 20% of the total capacity of the generator. And what that means is the solar array can provide maybe a portion of this spare capacity. Really what it is the solar array can provide the base load of the camp. You don't want to get into a situation where the solar array is backfeeding the generator. And so if you're going to have an unmanaged solution, it can occur. When solar arrays connect to the electric grid itself, by and large, that has been an unmanaged solution up to this point in the industry time. And that hasn't mattered because solar has been such a small portion of the grid. But it does matter in areas where every home on the block gets solar. It doesn't matter if one home on the block gets solar. Similarly, a small solar array can be successfully AC coupled to on-site gas generators, provided that it is very small compared to the overall operating capacity of that generator. And monitoring the site electric data can be a good starting point as well. So collecting that data is important. But this is actually pretty interesting, because what that means is almost like a very simple residential solar array where it's just one inverter, the modules are put up on the roof, and it's just connected to the grid and backfeeding the grid. A very similar simple solar array could be added to an off-grid diesel camp without disrupting any business as usual. And at that point, the solar array would be generating at the cost of the diesel fuel. So there would be a very real and potentially lucrative cost savings, using diesel off-grid generators to generate electricity is going to be more expensive than using grid electricity, apples to apples. And so the payback for an solar on an off-grid diesel array should be better. And so what that means is a small solar array could be added to the front end of an off-grid work camp with energy monitorings installed and have that be a very successful kind of data gathering preliminary project. And it also increases system reliability. How does reducing the diesel consumption on site increase reliability? Well, now they can go further between fill ups. And so if this is a off-grid labor camp in the north part of the United States and they get snowed in during a blizzard, it's not to say that this solar array is going to save the camp, but if it's doing 20% of the camp's, total energy consumption, then the time requirement between refills of the generators goes up by 20%. And so that a small solar array on an off-grid diesel camp makes a very good starting point if you're trying to, seek out a larger project, but maybe you're not yet qualified to do everything all at once. Maybe your client's not qualified either. Maybe your client wants to do something smaller. So then we get into more extreme cases where the solar array is now trying to offset a substantial portion of the on-site gas use. And that gets a little bit more interesting. Like an off-grid home, it gets into, well, if you want to back up the entire camp and not just critical loads, you need tremendous inverter output supply. It gets into battery sizing issues on, do you need a really large battery or just a small battery? There get to be concerns about, well, do the diesel generators, if they're not running and they're not running at full capacity, don't they build up gunk on the insides? And they do, but what the studies have found is that as long as these generators are running at full capacity at some point, like at night or on a cloudy day, as long as they get, or if you let the batteries run down and then you turn the generators on full blast just to recharge the batteries, once or twice a month, getting the generators to run full time to at some interval helps with their maintenance and is really all they need. And so once you get into the larger than just generating 10 to 20% of the site's energy needs, once you want to do 50% or 100%, you might say, well, I want to do 50% because mm, mm, yeah,